Well, good morning, folks, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Advanced Community Energy, a Policy, a Technology, and an Initiative. Happy to have you here. Your Clean Power Exchange webinar team is myself, Woody Hastings, Nina Turner in the back room there, our Energy Program Associate, and today we have Barry Vesser, our Deputy Director, who's our guest Q&A jockey to join us. So first, I just wanted to thank everybody. I know a lot of the folks on the webinar today attended the Business of Local Energy Symposium down in Irvine last month, and just wanted to thank you all for attending that, for your contributions to that. The presentations and other materials from the event are there at localenergybiz.com. And so again, thanks so much for that. This is the photo from the middle of the day when we had representatives from all 19 community choice agencies up there on the stage just to celebrate the fact that we have 19 successful rockin' and rollin' community choice agencies throughout the state of California. So that was one of the highlights for me to have all of them up there on the stage. So our presenters today are Greg Thomson of the Advanced Community Energy team. He will give an overview of the isACE campaign, the isACE initiative. And then for a community choice energy perspective, Joseph Wiedman, the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for Peninsula Clean Energy. Just a couple of housekeeping things I always run through for folks. If this is the first time on a webinar, the webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with all of you. It will also be posted on our webinar page at cleanpowerexchange.org. Everyone remains in listen-only mode throughout the webinar, but you can enter your questions in your control panel. Should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and there's a little questions tab. And you can enter questions for the presenters at any time during, and actually we encourage that, so we can, Barry and Nina can collect the questions and start being able to, go through those. So anytime during the webinar. And then we will try to save as much time, 15 minutes or so at the end of the webinar for your questions. There are some handouts also in your control panel. There's the Advanced Community Energy 4-page outline, the slide presentations in PDF form, and the presenter bios for today's webinar. So just a couple of things, super overview that I'd like to mention from the Center for Climate Protection perspective. Why is the Center for Climate Protection interested in advancing the Advanced Community Energy initiative? We see, our mission is all around greenhouse gas reductions, and we see the development of integrated distributed energy resources, which what isACE is ultimately all about, as a means of taking it to the next step in reducing greenhouse gases, getting it to the local level, and other community co-benefits that can be obtained from advancing this kind of local energy resource development. It represents sort of a continuity in terms of our activity in the energy arena, advancing localized clean energy systems. That's what we were really trying to do with our efforts in getting community choice strong in California. And we're always looking at ways to innovate, and this seems to us to be the cutting edge of innovation in the energy sector. And community choice is really robust now, strong, with Cal CCA defending in the regulatory and legislative arenas, and 19, as I've mentioned, community choice agencies around the state doing what they do. So sort of wanting to shift gears a little bit into, from advocating for the launch of community choice, which we still do, but also helping to develop programs that most community choice agencies we would hope would want to implement for the benefit, for the win-win benefits of their own agency and their customers in the general community. We also think that if the isACE concept is successful in California, it can be replicated nationally. So there's an amplification here that's possible. And we would love to see that happen. So the first step is to make it successful in California. And just real quick, a couple things that we've been doing, a few things we've been doing here at Center for Climate Protection in this arena. As folks that have been on previous webinars may be aware, we're working in a National Renewable Energy Lab funded project on advanced rate designs to incentivize distributed energy resources, working with two community choice agencies, Peninsula Clean Energy and Lancaster Choice Energy on that one. And then a California Energy Commission funded project working with MCE Clean Energy on building efficiency optimization, looking at developing program models for deploying integrated DERs. And then finally, we've launched our DER hub on Clean Power Exchange, so look for that. And that was the result of an Adobe Foundation funded project we worked on with 5 Bay Area community choice agencies to look at how can, what is the relationship between community choice and DERs, and how can community choice agencies play a strong role in the development of DERs. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I will now pull up Greg Thomson's slides, and he will provide us with an overview of the ACE program. And Greg, I will pass off the control of the keyboard and mouse to you. So you should, if you click in that opening screen, you should be able to take charge. And so without any further ado, folks, Greg Thomson.
Great, thanks everyone. And I want to thank the Center for Climate Protection and Ann and Barry and Woody and the entire team there for everything that they've done and are doing to help move community energy solutions forward and in leading this advanced community energy initiative. I have a few minutes, so I will go fairly quickly through the slides to present the ACE initiative, an overview of it, and then the slides are available, of course, and there can be questions afterwards and ongoing. So let me, there we go, it worked. All right, we'll start off. Today's grid was not built for the 21st century, so decarbonization, security, and resilience are now urgent priorities for our electrical system. And our technologies today offer much better solutions and business models than what we've had in the past. In addition, last century's utility role and compensation model desperately needs a 21st century update. So we're caught obviously in conflicts that we shouldn't be caught in because of this last century's role here for utilities. And communities and the representatives, of course, the CCAs and all of us deserve much more say and control. And this 20th century centralized top-down power system and its main institutions need a major update in order to meet the needs of today. Also, our new reality, energy is critical infrastructure. It is required to run critical services within our communities, health, water, police, fire, shelters, schools, etc., and to run our economies. The centralized energy system is highly vulnerable to major disruptions, as we know, from fires, from high winds, from randomly caused outages, from system constraints and other transmission failures. As we've experienced here in California, these extreme weather events are occurring more frequently, but it's happening around the country, of course, around the world. And it demonstrates the vulnerability and the high cost of this centralized model for the grid. We also have cyber attacks and terrorism as growing risks. And if there was a major event, and there has been attempts and some events around the world, it can affect millions. So what we require today is a secure, resilient, reliable, and cost-effective grid solution. And as regulated monopolies, our utilities in California should be required to support these needs of our communities. I'm going to dive into this quickly, but essentially the security risk is real, and our federal government today, the Department of Homeland Security, recently released a report titled Surviving a Catastrophic Power Outage, stating that we are vulnerable in this way, and it proposes solutions including local energy systems or microgrids that combine distributed energy resources, energy storage, and the consumer technologies we have available today. to help enable these local energy systems. And I just want to make this point to everyone here. No source of remote energy delivered over long distances, whether renewable or carbon-free, can provide community security and resilience in the face of these vulnerabilities. At the same time, because of this institutional preference for costly infrastructure, the transmission investment by utilities continues to explode. And so you'll see here over time how the billions of dollars that we are spending, that we as ratepayers, as communities are spending on this infrastructure, and how high it's gotten recently and how it continues to grow. And that's an expense we all pay on our bills. So what is ACE? In context of all of this, ACE is a proposed statewide legislative initiative and program to develop the right local energy resources across all California cities and counties, addressing today's grid needs. ACE resources will power decarbonization and resilience projects while supporting the optimal performance and efficient utilization of the existing power grid. So it's in combination, obviously, with what exists today, but it's adding the local energy systems that mean a 1 + 1 = 3. Under the ACE program, the state would provide funding, technical guidance, and other support so that communities and their representatives, the CCAs who represent multiple communities, and communities on their own where that's the case, can plan and implement ACE systems that serve local energy needs, advance state policy goals, and support this safe, reliable, and cost-effective power grid that we need. So let me dive one level deeper here. What is an ACE system? So this is a coordinated local energy system. So it's connected to the existing grid, and it features choosing locations where we can have optimal local generation, such as solar and storage, combining those two, and shaping loads so that we are looking at the load shape of communities today based on a centralized model, and we are shifting that to produce and make available local energy to a certain degree, to a certain percentage, for a certain amount that satisfies the community's needs in terms of resilience and security, and also reducing costs. So this targets improved system economics and local energy resilience and security, and substantial carbon reduction as its highest goals. And again, we're talking about the state providing, expertise and resources so that our communities can plan these systems and deliver, and we can execute on this. And this is a key point. So this delivers decarbonization, simultaneously delivers decarbonization, cost savings from peak reduction, and cost-effective support for electrification of transportation and buildings. So along with the benefits of resilience and security and lowering our most expensive energy, which is peaks, we are actually also using these local energy systems to support the electrification needs of transportation and buildings. And it's important to note that we can't do that cost effectively. The load increases that we need to electrify transportation, which is our biggest emissions category in the state, of course, the load increases that would cause on the centralized system that we have today would drive the cost way up. And so to cost effectively support electrification of transportation, again, a big initiative, we have to use a certain amount of local energy to do that, and it gives us resilience and security for that electrification of transportation and buildings that we can't get from remote resources. So via this proposed statewide program, this would provide supporting structure, funding, and resources to achieve this imperative and ensuring all communities are covered. And these systems are replicable and scalable. They apply to any city or county. And this gives us, our communities, the ability to get to achieve our decarbonization and economic and resilience and security goals. There's two slides here on the legislative and regulatory components. I'll go through this fairly quickly, but essentially the ACE planning structure would designate a state agency such as the California Energy Commission to establish the new statewide program that empowers local governments to design and implement these ACE systems. This agency would develop the standards and templates for ACE systems and requirements for stakeholder engagement. So this is emphasizing, again, decarbonization, resilience, and societal equity in alignment with a safe and efficient operation of the state and regional power grid. The agency would allocate state funding for local ACE planning, provide technical expertise, and perform ongoing oversight to ensure all communities benefit. Part 2 of this is the distribution utility framework. So the legislation at the state in Sacramento would direct the CPUC to develop and adopt through a regulatory proceeding provisions that define the role of the IOU, the investor-owned utility, in ACE programs. And so this would direct the utilities, would require the utilities to collaborate and support local governments and CCAs to develop ACE plans in accordance with the criteria of the statewide ACE program. And this is important, this next point. This would feature utility compensation being advanced from today's focus on capital infrastructure, which is a legacy centralized model for how utilities are compensated and why we have so much conflict today with scaling DER. We would change that to a performance-based regulatory model, which would include performance metrics for supporting ACE programs. So this is essential because it puts the utilities in a supporting role and a partnership role with us as communities and with CCAs. ACE benefits, again, we've gone through this, but I'll just summarize. It's lower costs, so we're delivering local balancing, which reduces the grid impacts by lowering the peaks and simplifying grid operations, reducing the high cost of transmission. It targets optimal locations and sizes for local resources, so that reduces costs in things like customer acquisition and establishing these local systems. We're providing energy resilience and security, as we've talked through. And it's also, again, a practical solution for achieving our emissions targets. So it uses clean energy to replace fossil fuels, but it also is a cost-effective way for electrifying transportation, homes, and buildings in coordination with our local climate action plans. And then it includes local economic investment and high-quality jobs. So it features investments in cities and communities based on these systems that are installed and operated for our communities. And includes, rewarding property owners. So if you're a large mall and you've got big roofs and a big parking lot, but you've got tenants and you have no way to save money from putting solar and storage on your property, this eliminates that barrier. And you as a property owner get compensated for using a roof or parking lot or both for an energy system that then the community benefits from, and that the CCA or the load serving entity can offtake and then provide locally. Everyone benefits here, we think. So communities, CCAs, ratepayers, as we've said. The utilities benefit because it gets them into sort of this century's model for how a utility should operate and should be compensated. And that's an important step because they're going to operate the grid, and we want them to operate the grid in the right way. The bulk power system, CalISO, benefits because this is a simpler and cleaner model for balancing the regional grid using the net impact of these community energy systems. And then managing net load shapes at the grid edge. This helps solve system level duck curve things, items, issues, and it eliminates the curtailment of renewables because we have storage playing a key role for local systems, and storage can play a key role in storing remote renewables that otherwise would be curtailed. Providers and vendors, this lowers customer acquisition costs, and as we've mentioned, because these are large community scale systems. And then the legislature and policymakers benefit because this is really a unified and scalable and cost-effective regulatory mechanism to deliver resilient communities and help California achieve our 100% clean energy goals and decarbonizing other sectors securely and cost-effectively, such as transportation. So that's the end of the slides, and I just want to give a shout out to some key folks who've been working on community energy systems for many years. So the Clean Coalition, Craig Lewis and Sam White and Bob O'Hagan, and that group, because in parallel with these other initiatives, they've been moving forward with creating the value of what a community energy system would bring. And so with that, I will end, and we hope that everyone out there will understand what we mean here by an advanced community energy system, and ACE, and the ACE initiative, and why we need this at the state level. And also it's replicable across the entire country. So if we get it done here in California, it will translate elsewhere. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Greg. Excellent presentation. And as our executive director, Ann Hancock, often says, these things can be seen as pathfinding endeavors, and I think this fits into that category. We're doing some pathfinding here. Joseph, I handed off control of the keyboard and mouse to you. You should be able to click into that opening slide and take control. If not, let me know.
Sure. Thank you, Woody. Good morning, everybody. This is Joseph Wiedman, and as Woody answered, stated, I'm the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs at Peninsula Clean Energy Authority. We are the CCA serving San Mateo County. And to give folks a little bit of a flavor of who PCE is, there we go. One slide. Whoa. Sorry, everybody. Woody, can you set that back up for me? There we go. Just give you a flavor of who PCE is. We started our full service to all of our customers in 2017. We have 290,000 enrolled accounts. About 5,000 of those accounts have opted up to our 100% renewable energy product, including such large entities as Facebook and Visa. We've been very successful in having a very low opt-out rate. As you can see there, 97.6% participation in our program. And then also what's highlighted there in bold is due to our 5% rate discount below PG&E's generation rate, we've saved our customers $35 million to date. It's about $18 million a year. In addition to offering these types of low carbon products to our communities, we also are tasked by our board with increasing innovation in the energy space directly. And so that's one of the things that instantly excited me about the ACE concept, is ways in which it can support broader innovation in all of the sector, the utilities, the CCAs, and third parties providing services behind the meter. So when I first took a look at ACE, one of the things I thought about is, well, gee, CCAs are already doing a lot of innovative programs. And this little chart kind of gives you a flavor of, at least from January, where CCAs are at and offering a broad range of programs. If you look at Marin and Sonoma towards the left, who've been up and running for a while, they've got a very broad suite of programs across a number of areas. And then, of course, other CCAs are coming up fast with programs that will support their communities. Lancaster, Pioneer, Monterey Bay already are developing microgrids, for example, one of the leading edge topics of the day, particularly as we discuss resiliency. Obviously, you'll see a number of CCAs there supporting EV incentives in both the sort of mainstream EV programs. And then for PCE, we also offer a very robust low-income program, particularly around used EVs, to help jumpstart that market. So at first I was kind of thinking, well, what's needed here, right? ACE is sort of, maybe we're already doing a lot of it. But the more I thought about it, and I guess I should say, and federal and state law already allows a lot of what's going on. Increasingly, state and federal law for the last 40 years has methodically worked to increase competition with the utilities. We have wholesale market generation. Those are the big generators you hear about, natural gas facilities. We have qualifying facilities, which are smaller scale facilities, usually combined heat and power. We now have net energy metering, where folks can generate energy behind their own meter for their own consumption and save money that way, and sort of compete with the utility. So that's the generation side. Transmission, we have FERC Order 1000 requiring ISOs who are considering a transmission project to look at alternatives. If those alternatives are brought to the market, are brought to the ISO for consideration, and we've seen some success in that. You know, even East Bay is working with PG&E on one such project, and there have been others in California. And then looking at the distribution system, you know, just a smattering of the types of opportunities for increasing competition in the distribution system. You know, way back in 2001, Section 353.1 was passed. You know, yada, yada, on and on, smart grids, when those were authorized, you know, we're supposed to be doing distribution resource planning to allow or identify optimal locations. You know, 1339 by Senator Stern passed, sorry, and I actually put in the bill number, not the section number. The bill number was SB 1339 in 2018 by Senator Stern, which is going to kick off some discussions on microgrids. So that got me thinking, so many tools, but so little movement. Why? And I think ACE actually hits the nail on the head. And I think these two quotes kind of encapsulate that. And if you look at what David Crane said, we really have a utility business model that is fundamentally at odds with where we want to head. We have lots of opportunities for competition, but from a utilities viewpoint, what that means is less return because their business model rewards them for doing infrastructure. All the other costs of employees and the planning and things like that are pass-throughs in rates, where they make their profits for their shareholders or by deploying infrastructure. And as David Crane noted, you know, quite some time ago, that is, you know, it's dead, it's obsolete, it needs to change. And of course, as President Picker picked up the baton at the PUC, I think he sees that too. We've got some of these tools, they're getting us to the place we need to go on particulars, but what we really need to be focusing on is this relationship between IOUs, consumers, other providers, and the ISO. And so to me, you know, that really is the nub of the problem. And what fixes that, in my mind, is ACE. It takes a transition of this utility's current business model. It breaks that cycle between dollars invested times the return, you know, rate of return for profits, and tries to say, no, let's focus on outcomes. Let's reorient through performance-based rate making and other reforms the opportunity to profit because you're meeting the outcomes society wants across a range of actors, right? So it's each of us coming together with our own needs, creating a framework called advanced community energy that can meet and align those needs. And it's a clear vision on how to do that versus, I think, the piecemeal approach that we've seen in the past, which was one of my, you know, former slides here with all of these different types of state laws and federal laws, slowly increasing competition. But then you get to the halfway point and the utilities just gonna fight it because they don't see a role for themselves in the future that offers them the profit their shareholders expect. And, you know, to be blunt, we live in a society that, you know, rewards capital investment and rewards people who make those investments. And so, you know, we live in that kind of competitive society, and we need to meet that issue head on. And I think ACE really starts to do that. But then I said, how? When I started thinking about what's needed in ACE, as somebody who writes legislation and tries to think about these things, these are some of the ideas I had on it. And of course, these don't represent, I think, anybody's view but my own, but I thought I would talk about some of them and then spend some time here. And the first one really is this idea that we need to look at fully unbundling transmission, distribution, and generation services. We've moved from a fundamentally vertically integrated model where PG&E, for example, was providing all of these services. Over time, as I showed in the prior slide, state and federal law has broken it up, but we still have a hybrid model. The utilities still basically own their T&D system and operate up at the ISO, their transmission system and operate up at the ISO. They still are making distribution system investments, and they're still allowed episodically to make generation investments. Mixing each one of those up, I think, can send the wrong incentives to an entity. They actually are somewhat able to compete against each other. Transmission investments can compete against generation. Distribution can compete, if we're careful, against transmission and generation. And generation and energy efficiency, solar behind the meter, can compete against both transmission, distribution, and large-scale generation. So let's break those up, get people competing against each other at even those foundational levels as a necessary predicate. But then you say, okay, well, if we do that, what about the distribution system? How do we reform it? If we keep poles and wires business as usual, we're going to have a constant struggle with the utility to say, I offset your distribution, so pay me for that. From the utility's perspective, they say, well, I lost money. My shareholders didn't get to make their rate of return. We need to transition to something like a distribution system operator, which then says, really, in the distribution system, there's not just the plain old poles and wires, who's putting those out there as the model, but there's also the operation of that system as a service. And then there's a market at the grid edge for services around those that can compete and collaborate with the distribution system deployment and operation. How do we do that? In my mind, and I have a typo there in that bullet point, it should be price cap regulation. I think we need to look at the idea of capping the price of distribution and couple it with performance-based compensation. And what you'd get from that is, while you're fixing the utility's revenue that's coming in from its deployment of the distribution system, if they go out and choose DER operators or energy efficiency to obviate the need for a more costly upgrade, they get to keep that money. They're going to pay the provider for the service being offered. If they assumed that that would have been a $300,000 upgrade, but through careful DER deployment and energy efficiency, it was $120,000, they keep the $180,000. We get beyond that. That's their profit motive. Performance-based compensation can help push that idea with DERs and energy efficiency, and clear operating requirements can support that. But in a way, you get at performance-based compensation saying, hey, how fast did you interconnect? How many systems did you interconnect? How did those DER providers feel about your collaboration and timeliness? And we basically take the utility's profit motive, and we, just like in a competitive business, you sort of fix the cost. But then you say, underneath that cost, if you optimize, you get to keep the money. And if you meet these other performance criteria that help you optimize, maybe you make a little bit extra. Third, we do need to have somebody in the system who's willing to take, on the generation side service, any customer who needs service but cannot get service from somebody else. That's called the provider of last resort. Personally, given that CCAs in their service territories serve 90% or more, as we serve 97.6% of our customers, we're the logical polar. The utility and direct access have way less load than we do. So if somebody is going to be polar in this system, I feel it should be us. That just makes sense. Because the risk of PG&E's 2.3% of customers coming back to us is way less than the risk of 97% of my customers coming back to PG&E. And that leads to my fourth point there. We need to strengthen CCAs to be these community energy providers, to be able to offer the types of services that we'd looked at earlier very briefly, rather than have this constant attack on us. And I think that's just a fundamental shift in sort of the political gestalt that'll occur over time, particularly if we're able to offer up a rational way to reform the sector to align people in their swim lane. And lastly, just want to highlight one fundamental issue for everybody in the system. who's not the utility. They already have great data on what their customers are doing. We need to have a fundamental reform that ensures every other market actor receives the data necessary to be able to engage thoughtfully with the utility on the deployment of resources that will lower costs, that will identify customers for which services are best offered, and that will unleash innovation. I mean, even right now, CCAs are not getting information in the time frames they need to fully unlock our ability to lower our customers' costs. AMI, the advanced metering infrastructure, just didn't get us there. So we've got to dig in there. I understand many folks concerned about privacy and data security. I was involved in all of these data discussions from the start, and I've watched them since then. We need to get past those concerns by addressing them, not letting them stop this ability to get this data, because that, at the end of the day, is what empowers consumers, CCAs, other third parties to really engage in this system. And so that is my thoughts on ACE and where I sort of see the lay of the land now and maybe where we need to head. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Joseph. Very, very interesting, informative, and yeah, great presentations all around. And I am going to now hand it over to, excuse me, hand it over to Nina and Barry for the, excuse me, for the questions and answers. So Nina and Barry, I would, folks, if you have questions and you haven't posted them yet on the Q&A panel there, questions panel there, and your control panel, please do. Barry, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. And thank you, Greg and Joseph, for your informative presentation. So the first question is, implementing ACE as a state design framework via agencies that take years to make decisions, provide guidelines, will take all the time we have left. How can we do this faster without the regulatory slowdown?
Well, that's a great question, and the intent here is to not be subject to our traditional incredibly slow pace of moving ahead with, you know, the energy system we need. And so that's a reason why the ACE legislation would, well, first of all, I should say that none of this is intended to slow down the progress that is being made in decarbonization by communities and as fast as it can go. That's needed. In this case, we want to move forward as quickly as possible with legislation, but have the CEC then be appointed to be the entity that drives this forward quickly within the state. It is not intended to be left up to the legacy regulatory or legacy pace of what the CPUC has been doing, in my opinion. So you're right, this needs to leapfrog all of that and jump to a very fast conclusion and solution that we can all act on quickly.
Great.
Yeah, and if it's, I was gonna say maybe, and if I would just comment, you know, I think that's right. I think, again, CCAs are already, you know, inherently moving in this direction. And so my thought would be it's more, you know, really getting at this performance-based rate making, price cap, if that needs to be in there, or if that's helpful. It's really more of an 18-month process there as we continue to move forward in our own parallel lines, but it aligns the utility with us more than us all needing to do a bunch of work to align with them.
Great. Next question is, does ACE incorporate pumped hydro within the local grid to support the imperative need for bulk storage of solar and wind resources within and without of the load pocket?
Yeah, and I'll just quickly answer that by saying that we would include everything that we need, and that would be included, of course, and it depends. And again, I know the location of those pumped hydro places is in question, but what we would do is appoint again, I mean, the California Energy Commission has budget and resources and expertise and funds all kinds of sort of R&D and pilot types of things. And what we want to do is move that quickly into deployment, covering the entire category of how the energy system needs to be advanced to this one. Now, I will say that ACE is focused on community energy systems. And so to the extent the bulk system needs to be updated to support that, that would be one of those aspects.
And I guess, just maybe to build on that a little bit, I mean, I think if the comprehensive whole showed a need for bulk storage, then I think something like that could make sense. It hasn't yet. And I'd also just say on a personal level, I have a little bit of concern about any sort of large facility being built. I mean, we're at a time where energy products are actually moving to be more modular and still have the same sort of outcomes. So the thought of building something like Songs, Diablo, or a very, very large bulk storage plant, that's a lot of risk. But again, if the system showed that that was necessary and needed and could complement the other work going on, then that's where we'd all be headed.
Thanks, Joseph. What do you, either presenter can respond to this, think are the main barriers currently to a CCA or a local area to reducing peak load and doing serious load shifting? These are the cost of storage, something else.
Well, I can start addressing that. I mean, I think one is, setting aside Sonoma and MCE, who are really starting to dig in on this and have developed some programs to start doing it. It's that the CCAs are so new. Most have just launched within, the last year or 18 months. And even PCE 2 years out, we're just starting to engage in that discussion. How to do that? What's the best way? How do we do it in the context of what our community's needs and desires are? But I think you're going to start seeing it as we mature, as a sort of group of organizations.
Yeah, I'll just add to that part of what ACE will solve is the current, again, slow pace of designing and deploying DER as a system for communities. And in the case of, our largest opportunities in communities, pick, commercial and industrial roofs and parking lots, for example, the model we have today, which is, typically DER is all about saving money on a utility bill. I mean, that's the economic model that gets it deployed today, especially, behind the meter for the most part. And when you go and run a program, which I've been involved in a city to change that model to scale, solar and storage locally for all the benefits that it provides, as we've discussed, and then you run into the issues with owners and tenants and how do you save money and who saves the money. That's a broken model for scaling this. And so part of ACE is changing that model so that any property owner can be compensated for using their property for, energy solutions that are provided to the community. And that will speed things up a lot, as one example.
Okay, this is a follow-up on a question that was asked. It was the first question, and the questioner says, "Missed the point. Is any agency fast enough? What can we, private sector, do to implement, these reforms, and what do the parallel lines, quote unquote, look like?" So I think the parallel lines means, like what are things that can happen in tandem?
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually had a very productive, positive meeting with the CEC on this initiative, and one of the comments was, this is all great, let's get some pilots going in parallel to the legislative effort to demonstrate that communities, number one, know they need this and require it and are moving forward in the ways that they can to showcase this as the right solution. And so I'm actually involved in Marin County's drawdown initiative, which is covering, emissions reductions and sustainability across an entire county. So it's not just a city, it's across the county. And so they are intending to move forward with some pilots of ACE systems to exactly do that, which is to demonstrate the need and the desire to move this forward. And it's actually in some respects, it's similar to what it took to get the first CCA off the ground, Marin Clean Energy, which was it was just a local, steadfast, determined a bunch of people who said, we need this and we're going to do it until it succeeds. And that's somewhat what we need here too, although we don't want to be on the time frame, of course, of how long it took to get MCE going, right? We've got to do this a lot faster.
Okay. What is the relationship of ACE to the state program called AEC, Advanced Energy Communities, which I believe is a program of the California Energy Commission?
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. So that's I was involved in winning an Advanced Energy Community grant for the city of San Leandro here in the Bay Area. And the intent of that is to help demonstrate what a community can and should get when it comes to energy and DER. But the result of that is that we've got a couple of projects to showcase that, but it doesn't change the model. It doesn't change how utilities operate. It doesn't change how people are compensated for this. It doesn't change how communities can actually do this at scale across the entire state. And so everything in the Advanced Energy Community Initiative at the CEC is helpful as a step towards us getting to this point, but it doesn't change how the state operates.
I mean, I think that's actually really hitting the nail on the head, is that it really doesn't dig down into what the fundamental issue is, which is, and I don't say this to be negative, because it's just a fact, the utility business model doesn't work anymore. And so we need to be looking at a comprehensive solution. And I think that's where ACE is different. It really does dig in on that particular issue. I mean, I don't think there's, beyond performance-based rate making, been a bunch of analysis about it. But given my experience on the issue in the telecom industry as it deregulated, I think it could be a pretty powerful transition force.
Okay, here's another question. Batteries can shift some load, but this will also require massive coordination of distributed energy resource load and supply. And currently, we also need some critical mass so that manufacturers create devices that are capable of responsiveness to safety and power consumption.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit in my involvement in the world of smart grid solutions. The technology to operate the grid this way actually pretty much exists. So in other words, microgrid controllers, distributed energy resource management systems, the software and smarts to initiate commands or controls or requests to the DER in the communities and have those requests or commands responded to in a timely fashion and in a secure fashion. And this is being demonstrated in certain states across the industry, across the country, in New England, especially in the East Coast. there are, programs moving forward where this is happening. Green Mountain Power is an example in Vermont where they put storage in homes and they're operating that to reduce the peaks for that utility. So they're reducing the total cost to themselves and to their customers because they're operating batteries that are located in homes and I think in commercial locations as well. So there are examples in growth in programs, grid services programs and others that are demonstrating the viability of this.
And I think just to put a finer point on that, because in my mind, I've followed the work Mary Powell has been doing for a number of years out there at Green Mountain Power. And if memory serves me correct, one of the biggest reasons that model works is because transmission costs come in based upon peak. And so for somebody like Green Mountain Power to lower their peak, they save a lot of money on transmission costs. And so again, breaking the cycle where everybody pays for T, everybody pays for D, whether, depending on, we need to get deeper into that model to make sure those assets can compete against one another.
There are a couple of questions about what an enormous political lift this is. So I'm going to read one of those. What are the most important political allies for making this idea become law? What are you doing to bring in labor and EJ organizations, environmental justice organizations?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that, Barry. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, maybe I can take a whack at that one. Well, the first thing to know is that ACE is, still in its incipient stages in terms of coalition building. And it's taken us a while to get to this point. The Center for Climate Protection has just hired a full-time program manager to lead the ACE initiative. And so we'll be reaching out to a lot more groups in the coming 6 months before the next legislative season gets started, both to get their input on refining the model and what's important in their communities. So I would say to date, the ACE concept has been shopped around a lot, but we have not been ready to really build the coalition until we had refined the model. So that will be the next phase.
And I just add that, from the CCA side, we have been working steadily with a broad range of stakeholders at the legislature, labor to utilities, EJ, local groups, in each one of our service territories. And while ACE in and of itself has not been a specific topic of conversation, because it really only now is fully coming together, my sense is to the extent that the CCAs collectively see merit in this type of project, and I personally believe they will, then I think we would be working to form the exact type of coalitions you're talking about and listen to each one of those stakeholders to build a bill that works for everybody.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Whoopsie, just moved. There we are. What role should CCAs play in resiliency planning in light of the public safety power shutoff? Which maybe one of you could explain, what that de-energizing the lines is all about for people who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, sure.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
I'd be happy to talk about that. So the Public Power Safety Shutoff Program is a program where, based upon various different types of modeling, weather modeling, system modeling, real-time data coming in through various different types of sensors and other things on the grid, for the utilities to determine the risk of a wildfire and would de-energization of certain lines help prevent a wildfire. Obviously, that's received a lot of press, and a lot of concern is developing in communities when you think about the power being shut off for 1 to 5 days. We've already seen events where that can be very disruptive in people's lives. And as we're moving to wanting more increased building electrification, we really do need to be moving to a system, in my mind, that's like ACE, that says there's a role for distant power to play, and we need to look at that within the context of de-energization. But in particular, to help community resiliency, we really need to be looking at how do we harness the private investment folks are willing to make behind the meter with community scale investments by the distribution system operator and energy service providers like CCAs to ensure a community can continue to function, hopefully on some broad level, not just a few grocery stores here are operating and a few other things are operating, but on a much broader scale, maybe at reduced power, but is able to ride through that event. And I think that's the role CCAs can play, as we've got the expertise on these systems. We've got relationships with our county OOS, with our county fire, and other folks in in all of our cities. We can identify those critical facilities, work with the utility to put forward a plan, and to the extent we're all operating within a framework that aligns our incentives, and that's part of, again, this performance-based rate making, or in my mind also couple it with a price cap, we can align everybody's incentives and get this outcome going.
So, Barry, and we have time for maybe one more quick question, if there is one. And Greg and Joseph, we're getting close to noon, so if you can keep your responses concise, that would be good. And then I'll just have some closing remarks.
Okay, I'm going to give you this one. Presenters are talking about optimizing peak power at bulk market costs, but there is much more at stake. Look at countries where there are high penetrations of local DER, for example, Australia and Germany, and the system reliability problems that causes. Comment.
I think the commenter raises a challenge that we'll have to work through. It's not a all DER, it's not an all way out in the hinterlands, big facilities. It's reimaging a system that can do everything that we need to do over a set series of time as we iterate towards it and address those types of issues.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the issues with adding a bunch of renewable energy to the grid as it was designed and architected to be a centralized model is the main reason why these issues are occurring. And rethinking how the grid operates in terms of having a large percentage being handled locally with generation, but also with storage and smart switching and everything else that's available now. That's achievable, and that's starting to happen in other countries where DER has penetrated in bigger ways. And there's some projects that I'm aware of where things like the virtual power plant model, which means you're aggregating DER across neighborhoods or substation areas or across feeders, and you are operating that as a virtual power plant and integrating with the grid upstream from that and providing the net impact of that virtual power plant to the grid, to the distribution grid, and then upwards to the regional grid. So those models are now moving forward, advancing, and projects are happening to demonstrate that.
Well, thanks very much. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say thanks everybody for your questions, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all, but great questions and comments.
Right. Thanks so much, everybody. And again, thanks, Joseph and Greg, for the fantastic presentations and responses to those questions. And I just wanted to, as Barry mentioned, we have hired Greg Thomson as a program manager for the ACE program, and you'll be hearing lots more about him in the coming months. And Kurt is a graduate of Stanford and Johns Hopkins, deep experience in energy and legislation as a legislative aide in DC, working at the US EPA and the California Public Utilities Commission and in the private sector. So he brings a lot of really deep experience in the sector, and we're looking forward to having him take the helm on the program. And just a couple more notes about next steps. We're continuing to refine what ACE is, and so that is somewhat ongoing. And as we bring in other stakeholders, we will be sort of refining and expanding what it means to be an ACE system and an ACE initiative. We'll be seeing a web presence on the Clean Power Exchange website with a page for the ACE program. We are going to be organizing on this, leading to what's hoped to be 2020 legislation. So stay tuned for all that. Just a quick thing on things coming up. Just a note that the webinar recording will be distributed to all of you, and it'll also be posted at our webinars page, Clean Power Exchange. The next Lean Energy US Market webinar is on September 13th. Those are always very packed with great information. And our next Clean Power Exchange webinar, we haven't sorted that out yet, so stay tuned for more on that. That's my contact information, and we do invite folks to send me any suggestions you have on future webinars. We'd love to hear your suggestions. Lots of endless number of topics always, and we've got our own ideas, but we want to hear yours as well. So with that, thank you all very much for joining us, and that concludes today's webinar. Have a nice day.